roll call, public comment, and then the presentation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and everyone is joining us shortly. Okay, President Buona, when you're ready.
Okay, we are ready. Chancellor, and I forgot.
Recording in progress.
Are we? Let's do roll call.
Yes.
I don't have the script with me, so Chancellor, if you could
Yes.
tee it up or anything.
Yes, I'm happy to assist. We'll start with roll call, the members of the board, followed by any public comment, and then turn to Dr. Smith for the introduction of the presentation.
Okay, so roll call, Lupe.
Trustee Buona,
Here.
Trustee Henderson. Absent. Trustee Hoffman,
Here.
Trustee Eno,
Here.
Trustee Moreno,
Here.
Trustee Vela, absent. Trustee Vettis.
Here.
Thank you.
Oh, Trustee Vela is here. He needs to be promoted to panelist.
He's joining us shortly.
Okay. In the meantime, any public comment?
No public comment.
Okay. Chancellor, after that on the agenda?
We now turn to Dr. Smith, who will introduce the presentation and topic for today.
Okay, Dr. Smith.
Thank you, President Buona. Good morning, trustees, Chancellor, my esteemed colleagues, and members of the public.
Dr. Smith?
Yes.
And I apologize. Trustee Vela is now in the room, so he has the floor as the chair of this committee. So Trustee Vela, we did roll call. There was no public agenda. Dr. Smith was about to begin.
Thank you. Matt Bohannon with Brailsford and Dunleavy is with us today. If we can bring Matt in as a panelist while I give his introduction, that would be greatly appreciated. Matt has been with B&D for almost 18 years. He's very experienced at advising community colleges, UCs, CSUs across the state with a varied experience in student housing, planning, development, and construction. Matt will share some key findings today from the student and workforce housing analysis that was recently completed. So at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Matt to provide a presentation for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. Good morning, all, and good morning, trustees. If we could have the presentation up on the screen. Great. Well, as we work to get the presentation up, want to give a little bit of a highlight in terms of we were brought on board to assess and look at and conduct the preliminary student and workforce housing needs analysis. Our work here really was done in a way to take that first step and really understand the aspects, the broad scope and range of need that our students, faculty, and staff has as it relates to housing. So if you advance to the next slide, please. We'll be looking at a number of items today. We want to run through our key objectives, go through into our individual analyses as it relates to the students, as it relates to our workforce, and then come back to recommendations and considerations as we look to move forward. And so our objectives really were, as I mentioned, is that first step, looking at scope and scale to look at housing needs. Now, what this will enable you all to do is have information to really determine what is appropriate on the next steps, what is the path forward, because we're really looking at what are the current living conditions and situations of our students' employees. What are their costs? What are those burdens as it relates to their income? What percentage of a burden is there? What interest is there as we're relating to SB 169 affordability, which for last year was $700 a month as defined by HUD and the Senate bill. And then, is that even a right number based on what we see from our students? Because we really want to understand what is that ability to contribute? What are those opportunities that are presenting to our students? And as we found across much of the state, no matter if we could make housing or make our colleges and universities free for all students to be part of it, as has happened with grants, moving forward, housing, secure housing, affordable housing remains one of the greatest barriers to access and completion of degrees across our higher education system. And so excited to share a little bit more about what we found out today. Next slide. And I want to start off with some definitions as we are describing them. So one of which is housing insecurity. And we define that as an individual living in an unstable, unaffordable, and unsafe living condition. For example, you don't have a lease or subsistence, couch surfing, or there may be some other sheltered situation that is a part of that. We actually use the term houselessness versus homelessness. And houselessness in that regard is a lack of a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence, where there is no sheltered housing, if you're living in a car or something along those lines. And we have housing burden, as we're describing it, is the portion of your gross monthly income that is going towards your rent. Now, when we're looking at affordability in that range, we're about, HUD looks at that, and we're about 30%, a third of your gross income going towards housing would be an affordable percentage compared to what many of our students, faculty, and staff are actually contributing. So let's dig into the students. And first, we wanted to share a little bit about the demographics. We had a survey that went out. A lot of our information was gathered through this effort. And we wanted to compare our survey sample to the overall student population in a number of factors. One of which, as we look at the distribution and participation of our survey sample compared to students and their home colleges, we were fairly close in terms of representation. We had some slight over and unders as a part of it, got a little bit less from Valley compared to the overall student population, a little bit more than City College. But all in all, within some good metrics and some good ranges as we see here. Similarly, as we were looking at ethnicity, we were fairly close in terms of those broad breakdowns of demographics to where we had some undersampling from our Asian and Pacific Islander populations and our American Indian populations. We had slight oversampling in our Hispanic population and Latino population, and then a little bit higher as well in our Black population. We did receive a greater percentage of our participation from our full-time students compared to part-time students. And so we had 31% full-time compared to 20%, which is the actual information from all of your students right now. So we did do our best to look at and weight that and separate that out. So we'll see some distinctions between those populations as we move forward. And we also have some other statistics on here to share. 62% of our respondents are single without children. 18% of those are single with children. Next slide, please. And so here's a broad graph looking at our housing situation of our population. First off, first bullet point that is out of this is that 14% of our total respondents are either housing insecure or houseless. And we asked our question in a way of what is their current situation. A lot of questions that are out there on past surveys or on surveys that have gone across the state in higher education have focused on what is or have you experienced houselessness or housing insecurity in the past 12 months? And a lot of those numbers we see typically are in the 30+% because it is tracking over a 12-month period. In our window, our 2-week window that we had our survey, this is the direct responses of students, is that 14%, which is higher than what we've seen at a number of our other surveys that we've done in the past 6 months or so for that specific moment in time. And as we look at our populations here, and look at that 14% overall, you'll see a red line going across the bottom of the chart. And that represents that average of 14%. But we broke it up in terms of colleges and where students identified as their home college. So we can see that there is some variance where our LA Trade Tech students are at 22% identifying as housing insecure compared to the 14% average, and LA Mission College at 11% compared to that 14%. And so we wanted to see just where as we look at this chart, some differences here in terms of those situations. And so 51% of our overall population is student population is paying rent. It has a signed lease within the greater LA market. Some colleges have a little bit higher representation of that, as well as our salmon color there representing those that are living with family and contributing rent. So that's an average of 34%. Just because students are living at home doesn't necessarily mean they aren't contributing to the financial stability of that house. And so that has to be factored in as we look at and consider any sort of need from a housing perspective as well. Typical challenges that our students are facing right now is finding lack of units in their price range. And as we've seen considerable increases in housing costs across the area, that is becoming more and more acute. There's a lot of barriers as well, particularly as we're looking at things like security deposits and move-in fees. And so when anyone in the off-campus market is looking to rent and they have to pay first and last month's rent up front plus a security deposit, that is a pretty insurmountable barrier for a number of our students, and one of the greatest challenges they have just even getting into a stable situation. Next slide, please. And so we did look at and ask about income from our students, top ranges in terms of those that are actually incoming from working, followed by grants, a variety of other sources, including parental support. But as we look at this, 18% of students indicated they have no monthly income. If we're breaking down averages across our full-time, part-time, and non-credit students, you'll see that the average income coming in from full-time is about $1,100 a month, part-time at about $1,300 a month in income. And you'll see what that means in terms of also the rent. Those students are paying about $500 to $600 in rent, plus over $100 in utilities on a monthly basis. So it's a pretty significant percentage overall of their income going directly to rent, which obviously has impacts on other things. If they have car, insurance, food insecurities, all components that tie into the overall ability of a student in our minds to be able to find success and to not have a grumbling stomach when they go to class, know that they can go home and have a place and a roof over their head. Next slide, please. We, going back to our 14% housing insecurity rate across the entire student population, we also looked at that compared against our responses by demographics. Now, remember, some we had some oversampling, some we had some undersampling. But if we're looking at that 14% overall, and we look at our Black population, 22% of our Black students are experiencing housing insecurity in this moment compared to 14% of the overall average. We also see from our American Indian population, 25%. Now, we only had a small number of that, but it is still a portion of the numbers that we're looking at. And I think important to recognize how there is some disparity in terms of how housing insecurity is impacting our students. And the map on the right looks at the level of housing burden. And so the darker the red, that is a part of this by a zip code analysis of where students are living, you'll see the greater ranges of housing burden, getting beyond what we would deem as that 30% affordable mark and going all the way up into 45 plus into 60% range of their income actually going towards their housing. So what does this all mean as we look at this first pass from our analysis and our preliminary needs? Well, digging into the data, looking at what we heard and saw from the analysis, discounting for students that are currently within stable housing situations that aren't paying for rent. They're maybe not a target market that we're looking at for a part of this when we're really looking at need. We looked at the potential of the population that had an interest in housing that would be affiliated with the university. And we also looked at those populations that either directly said that they are dealing with housing insecurity, houselessness, but also are having that financial burden. So looking at what those incomes were on a monthly basis compared to rental rates in the market, and then tying into what we saw from that reported income, we're projecting that up to 53% of LACCD students are in need of affordable housing. The vast majority of that is represented by our part-time student population, biggest percentage of our campus body anyway. But that's about 41,000 beds, or individuals, I should say, 41,000 students that have a need for student housing of some form. 11,000 or so full-time students and close to 6,000 non-credit students as a part of this. Now, this is students, and some of these students may be a single student that can have a room in an apartment. Some of these may be students that are single parents, as they represented a significant portion of our population as well. So it's not just a room or a bed, but it could be a unit. It could be other aspects of housing that's a part of this. And as we looked at ranges for price points, is while affordability as defined by SB 169 is tied to HUD metrics, and HUD metrics are based on area median income, it doesn't accurately reflect what the incomes are that our students would have. And so we're looking at roughly that target range from what we saw in our data of what students may be able to pay, and going for, we're likely looking at an ideal range of $400 to $500 for rent. That would also include utilities that would be a part of this, and which is significantly lower than what that $700 benchmark was for SB 169. So I'd like to transition now. Actually, sorry, one more slide on the students piece. Yes, you can, if you continue to the text slide. We did capture some direct quotes from the survey. Students had the option to enter in some comments. We also paraphrased from the items and comments we had in our focus groups, the qualitative research we were doing as a part of our analysis. And I think you can read these and get a sense of it. But you know, some of the things we just heard of, it's not just housing, but there's elements that that students like to see, such as financial literacy, food pantry, childcare as an element of it. Looking to really that students are great students, but they may not be able to have secure housing, and that's why they have to leave, because they have to find a way to afford housing. You know, and the importance of having a car, because that is how you get to employment, get to campus, and that is a big concern in terms of losing that as well. So I'd like to transition over to our series of slides on our workforce analysis. And we have a similar format and follow through, so I won't exactly go through each item line by line, but you'll see here, similarly, we did a comparison of our survey sample to workforce. We have some variations as we look at this of oversampling and undersampling, a little bit less for East LA compared to the overall workforce at the district, a little bit less than some of the other categories as well. Response by ethnicity, you'll see some of the variations, fairly minor overall when we get as a part of this, less than 5%, which is pretty good in our minds as we look at this information. And some other overrepresented and underrepresented as we're looking at specific elements of our part-time. And that's really where we see that distinction again. And so we looked to adjust our numbers appropriately as a part of this. And you'll see we had some overrepresentation in technical cleric position titles, a little bit of underrepresentation in adjunct faculty. Next slide, please. And so a little bit more about the population. Some of this is not necessarily what's driven by demographic data that you collect, but as we're looking at our survey respondent population, we had about a third of those are married or partnered with children or dependents. We specifically included dependents as a part of this because we are in an interesting time, and we have a bit of the Oreo generation in some ways, where dependents may not necessarily just be our younger children. We may have elder dependents or other dependents that are a part of the care. And so that factors into likely the numbers you see here in terms of the 30% that are single without dependents, 20% that are married without children or dependents as a part of this. Nearly 20% of our population is commuting more than 1 hour to their primary campus of work. 58% of employees are commuting longer than 30 minutes one way. And obviously that time has an impact on a lot of things. And when we're looking at where our workforce is looking to live, key factors that tie into that, total cost of our rent or mortgage, the quality of housing, the size of housing, type of housing, and travel time to campus. And the fact that travel time is important, yet we still have a significant number of our population commuting more than 1 hour away or more than 30 minutes away from their main campus is something that everyone is balancing. And so we looked again at a little bit more about current living situations. It's a little bit different with this population compared to students, as we have a lot of ownership that's a part of that. You'll see upwards of 30 to 40% of those that are owning, smaller percentage overall, and some campuses are leasing and renting. And we do have a small percentage, very small percentage of our overall workforce did identify as houseless or housing insecure, 0.2% and 2% respectively as a part of that. With our workforce population, one of the things that we wanted to do was look at how age actually has impacted their view in terms of satisfaction of rent and mortgage costs in the area, and the challenge that a lot of our younger employees, particularly our 20 to 40 range, have in terms of their satisfaction level. You see only 20% of those that are aged 20 to 30 are actually having very or somewhat satisfied with their total cost, compared to those that are older, that we're getting closer to half or even higher in terms of 70. And those that have been in the market, have been in positions, are okay. They may have purchased a house 20, 30 years ago and are perfectly fine in that situation. But as we look for those individuals that may be retiring, that may be moving on, and we have to fill by our younger employees, that becomes more of a challenge for them to come in, and obviously plays a recruitment challenge for the district overall. We also included a percentage on a table on there, home ownership by ethnicity, seeing where some of those items are. Overall, 42% of our population indicated that they were homeowners. Similar on the right, we have a chart that's looking at housing burden by zip codes, going up again from 30% to 60% range. It's kind of a key market there. And you'll see we have quite a few more of those darker blue items that are here, the darker shade compared to when we had from our students, that really do indicate that there are some more challenges by our faculty and staff as they're looking to have housing. 78% of respondents indicated the scarcity of homes in their desired price range as a major obstacle to even getting into the market. And again, similar to our students, we have a lot of barriers that go in front of things like down payments, monthly payments, property taxes, that do impact our ability to our employees, our workforce ability to get into housing that they really want. And so similarly, to determine need, we looked at an understanding of our population. So those that are in stable housing, those that own a home, not considered really a need for us. We really looked at those that have an interest in college affiliated housing. We also looked at those that demonstrated a financial need. So those that do have a housing burden income that is higher than what we would deem affordable, including those that small percentage that did identify as housing insecure as well as houseless. And that brought us up to about 13% of employees potentially needing affordable housing. About 600 of those or so are part-time employees, about 400 or so are related to our full-time employees. And looking at the financial information that was available, particularly for our target market, those that have the lower income and represent a greater, that rent and mortgage, for example, represent a greater burden on their income than others. looking at a full-time employee being something that would be affordable for them would be in the neighborhood of $1,400 a month. And similarly for a part-time employee, that would be around $1,100 per month. And so when we look at our overall finding, conclusions that were coming out of this, up to 53% of our students, up to 13% of our employees are projected to have a need for affordable housing. And again, this is based on interest, it's based on income and their current housing situation. We feel that an appropriate price point, if we're looking at affordable student housing, is more in the neighborhood of $400 to $500 compared to $700. That may be the number that is calculated by SB 169. It's also important to note that 92% of housing insecure students recognize that there's a moderate to severe impact on their academic pursuits. This is a population that we want to see succeed. We want to see opportunities for them to get the education, to go into the workforce, or to transfer. And that housing is a key detriment to that ability to succeed. The average housing burden for our students is approximately 45%. And if given more financial support or income, 51% of students would say that they would prioritize a better, more secure living situation. And over to our faculty and staff, as I mentioned on the previous slide, that range that we see from an affordable perspective is about $1,400 to $1,100, depending upon employment status. And I think, as anyone knows, in the LA market, those numbers are very low compared to what you could find just from any rental property on a per unit basis. And this particularly acute and challenging for our employees that are under 40. And so going forward, we recognize that as a part of this, there's likely a greater housing need in the district to accommodate through your own resources. I don't think that would be surprising to anyone, actually, but it's important to note that there is a large need, and that if the district decides to move forward and proceed with housing in some way, shape, or form, we would recommend a multifaceted approach. Is really, we want to determine what can be developed through your resources that the district has, through leveraging state resources, SB 169 or other funding that may be available, but also what partnerships may exist with the city, with the county, to support and provide options for our students. What other options are there to engage local partners like Hoveness, LA Room and Board, a number of other nonprofits that are out there that can provide resources to our students that may have a benefit in more short-term options, but also long-term housing opportunities. And maybe even there's opportunities from a workforce perspective and partnerships with the Unified School District. And leveraging land, they would likely have similar resources as well, because part of what we want to do is see how far we can stretch our dollars. What can we do to really find those opportunities to support our students? And we have very different needs amongst our populations. We have a single student, no dependents, that may be 22 years old, that is perfectly fine in more of a multifamily environment, an apartment living situation. We may have those single mothers, single parents that need a different type of situation. And sometimes those populations don't mix easily, or may not be best suited to have them that way, because we want to provide resources to support them individually. And that element of a greater, more detailed analysis, we think, is really one of the next steps as well, because we want to dig into those specific needs of our primary markets, of really understanding those students that have the greatest need. How can we best suit them? What is something that the district may want to take on? And what are those areas of partnerships that may be able to better serve our students as well? And I think it's important that if we move forward, that there's a dedicated district-wide campaign, so that all levels of the district and colleges and units understand why we're looking to do this, the importance behind it, really getting out there the desire for us to get a lot of information at hand and dig into more details, because while we got good participation, I'd love to see more. I'd love to be able to dig into more data, and having a greater timeline, building up to a survey that allows us to do that, and more interaction with our community is important. We also feel it's important to develop those operational expectations and requirements through our shared governance paths so that all levels of the district really do understand the expectations, the requirements, the needs, because there's concern overall of how will it be operated? What are the requirements? What about long-term care? So the more that we can have expectations and understanding of what that is now, I think it is going to be better in the long run for us. It also helps us develop those detailed financial models, understanding how we're going to be running it, what are the expectations of the facilities, so that we can get the operating costs and ultimately look to how close can we get to that target price point that we identified, and what other subsidies, what other work may need to be done, what other elements are here that may be necessary to get to that point. Because recognizing we may have to look for additional subsidies for some segments of our population that may not be able to even make that $400 or $500 a month in terms of rent from our student body. So I know I went through a lot. I want to be sure that we have time for discussions with the group. I want to thank you for your time so far.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt. Very thorough. Appreciate that. Dr. Smith, do you want to continue to present? I can't. You're muted, Dr. Smith.
Sorry, that concludes our presentation, Chair Bell.
Okay, thank you. Let's go ahead and start with our trustees. If there's any question, please raise your hand or go ahead and just unmute yourself, especially those who are joining us remotely. Thank you. Any questions from our trustees? Okay, Trustee Hoffman, yes, thank you. All right.
Thank you, Trustee Vela. Hi, Matt. Always good to see you. And that was a really great presentation. I appreciate it. So really interesting. The city of Glendale is working on, I think, 3 or 4 projects for workforce housing. And as everyone knows, I work at Glendale College. So Glendale College employees were actually offered an opportunity to participate in the workforce housing. And I know there's kind of a formula and like 3 different tiers of income levels and family size, and that's how you would qualify. And literally like the lowest rent is way above what you sort of just presented in terms of what our employees could afford. So I'm wondering, for those, if we were going to do workforce housing for those employees, the district would have to subsidize the remaining portion of their rent. Is that how that would work?
So we'd want to look at it in a few different ways. And yes, you're correct, Trustee Hoffman. That aspect of means-tested affordable housing ties into the household income that's a part of it. Mm-hmm. And obviously, for those that have a single person that's working, single mother, single father, rather than a dual income household, that has challenges in meeting some of those thresholds as well. What we're also looking at from depending upon the structures of that housing opportunity in Glendale, I don't know how much is actually being contributed towards the capital of the project that is or just the operations of the project and going towards the day-to-day care. If this is something that is supplemented through funding from the district in terms of the capital side of the project, and we're really looking at what is the operating cost, what's the long-term care of the projects that are a part of it, that number may be different than what is the proposed number from what Glendale is able to do. The other element that we could look at is different financing structures. 221D4s, other types of arrangements from financing or P3s would enable us to maybe look at what is our solving for the greatest price points reduction or the greatest connection to what we see as our target numbers there, for us to be sure that we're able to appropriately price our product. There could be some other subsidies. There could be some other assistance that we could be looking at. I think the greatest control you all have is related to the capital costs of a project and being able to find ways to lessen those so that the actual ongoing and recurring rent is not going to be as much of an issue as it may be looking at a project that has to cover debt repayments on construction loans.
And then some of that workforce housing, wouldn't it be, some folks could afford to pay what, close to market rate, correct? And that could help offset the subsidies for students or other employees that we may want to put in that housing or offer that housing to. The Glendale project the Glendale Community College District didn't contribute. We have nothing to do with it. They just are offering it to Glendale Unified, Glendale College, and Glendale City employees, which I thought was really interesting. And then as far as students are concerned, so I would imagine if we did workforce housing, employees, that's more of a long-term situation, but for students, that would be a short-term situation, correct?
Yes and no. I will want to proffer that one of the challenges around workforce housing and employee housing in some ways is you want that as a continual cycle of those that are living and moving off. You wouldn't want to build 100 units and then those be filled up instantly and you don't have access to those 100 units again for 10 years. So there is a piece and expectations I think we'd want to look at of considerations of how do we view the housing? Is it long-term? Is it mid-term? Is it allowing individuals to be able to save up and get out into the market to be able to afford something or to move out and engage in a different way? From a student perspective, I think there is a little bit more of a shorter term piece that we want to be looking at. Not necessarily that I take one unit and I can stay here for 10 years just because the rent is affordable. We want expectations in terms of students that are living there, either from a academic performance and a course load perspective, which is fairly typical amongst student housing. But I do think we need to also have some give and take in that. And so while it may be short term for a year or maybe short term for 6 months for while they were students, we also saw that there's challenges in getting into the market. So if I'm a student and I'm working towards my certificate and I graduate, I'm there and I've been in housing, affiliated housing on campus or elsewhere, do I still have the resources or am I prepped to go right into the off-campus market? I may not have that down payment ready. I may not have first and last month's rent. And so operationally, do we look at a grace period? Operationally, do we look at things in a way that will allow students to get their feet settled as they're getting into the market as well? It's those bridge periods that often can be overlooked when we're thinking about housing from students and our workforce perspective of what happens when they leave and how do we make sure that's a successful transition and not just a transition of getting them out of the nest.
Thank you. I know we have a time crunch here, but I appreciate your answers and your thoughtful presentation, and good to see you.
Good to see you. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Hoffman. Are there any other questions from our trustees? If so, go ahead and unmute yourself. Trustee Vettis.
Okay. Let me ask sort of a couple in the frame here. I guess what I'm trying to, but I'd like to say, and it's been part of our debate for several months, is that housing is affordable housing, I should say, is an absolute crisis in Los Angeles. And maybe to a certain extent, it is in the state of California, but certainly in Los Angeles. And I think one of the interesting challenges is, and maybe you're sort of touching on it, on the length of time that people or students per se can and should be in properties. But one of the things that feels sort of challenging to us is that because the need is so great. I mean, we're talking about like half the students that are coming here having the need, and it just feels like that's a reflection of the market of Los Angeles and how that's a very difficult and tight market. In terms of the workforce, clearly, on the younger side, reflects some of the challenges with home prices and being able to buy and purchase. And the older side seems to be the stable component of the workforce. But I think the sort of, as we wade into the needs here, we have a principal focus as an organization to educate. housing is part of our basic student needs components of all the things that we could do, right? Which is, there's a whole laundry list of what is classified as basic student needs. The social component, this like they kind of sort of mentioned at the K through 12 level, a social worker component. In terms of like, as we move into these spaces, I'm calculating up, if we were trying to meet the need that was demonstrated on paper, that's almost 60,000 units of housing for an organization that's really probably sort of secured maybe a maximum of 300 beds over the life of its existence. So to sort of ramp up and be meaningful, but at the same time to consider manageable are sort of really challenging questions. To go from 0 to high speed, or high density, I should say, is not to, I think sometimes people see a surface parking lot and says, great, we can do housing. But there's a lot more to that, considering that the sort of broadness of the need is so great. But the need really does come from the fact that the region's in crisis, and it's in a housing crisis. And so I'd say this, I know probably in the Valley College, Pierce College, Mission College area for the city of Los Angeles, that reflects probably the greatest number of accessory dwelling unit permitting that's happened in the city of Los Angeles, to be viewed as an affordable form of housing. Around Trade Tech, around City College, there's a lot of transit-oriented development, very dense housing that's been developed, and also to a certain extent at West LA. Maybe not quite the housing booms down around Southwest, around our satellite in Southgate and down in Harbor. But the city and the county as a region have taken multiple kinds of approaches to sort of just try to create more. And I think in our mind, I guess what I kind of struggle with is knowing that we can survey and have a need at like half of our students and 13% of our workforce, and know that the calculations to that are very substantial numbers, to the point of not having done it, not having contracted with it. I've shared with my colleagues from some of my day job work, when we look at Measure Triple H in Los Angeles, a housing and homelessness effort there. I mean, that was about $1.5 billion, 10,000 units. That's for the city of Los Angeles, on top of everything that's happened. That was supposed to be subsidized affordable housing and permanent supportive housing. But that's only 10,000 units, and that's the entire city with housing departments and whole processes to get things built and inspected. Those are things that we don't sort of have here. But I'm trying to also sort of understand my own dormitory experience and looking at places like UCLA, and the UCLA, I think, put out a message of guaranteeing housing for every student that attends there, which is interesting. But that was a market rate, endeavor. There was didn't matter that I was a working class student. You had to pay what everybody else had to pay, and I just had to cobble it together through financial aid. And so that's an element here too. And I think that's one of actually the beauties of SB 169 is that it starts providing this idea that, you're going to get some prioritization if you're a low income student. That hasn't been sort of the dialogue and debate about creating student housing in America's colleges and universities out there. So I guess it's become more of a commentary, but I think the question I'd like to ask is to understand the balance. Like, how do we strive for the balance between us being an education institution, trying to deal with basic student needs, and the responsibility of the county, responsibility of the city, who have RHNA numbers, the Regional Housing Needs Assessment, who have those things built into the responsibilities. We don't have a RHNA number. We don't have any version of that. We're trying to deal with basic student needs. That's why we're endeavoring in this, and that's why we're working hard in this area. But what is the balance, and what is the balance, the responsibility for that balance would you assess is this district?
Yeah, very difficult question, and that's the same one that many other districts and colleges are wrestling with. The aspect of an area that has historically been outside of our scope, and yet we are on the front lines of dealing with it day to day with our students because of these basic needs. And oftentimes, our students are the ones that are left behind when affordable housing conversations come up, even at the state level. You look at the legislation that is there for defining affordable access to projects, and most of the time, students are excluded. If you're a student, you can't access Section 8. You can't access these other funds. And so how do we, what level of responsibility and care and thought are we wanting to take on and provide support for? And I think the next step is sort of looking at that in greater detail, of really getting that understanding of, we have this big need. And as I mentioned, there's likely more than we can handle. And not all of that should be ours. Maybe there's partners, maybe the aspects of working with the city and the county and the state for other resources. But is there a segment of our population that we recognize has the greatest need, that for us to invest in a new asset in housing, for example, and those wraparound services? It's important to think about. It's not just a head on a bed, but it is the health support, the mental support, the counseling, the academic tutoring, because we are here to get a student. We're not here to house them. We're here to educate them so that they're able to go into our workforce and be ready and engage in contributing to our society. If we can find and look at what is really our greatest benefit of where we have the greatest impact, maybe that's where our focus could be as a district, is understanding that group that we have the greatest ability to shape, to control, to provide the right resources and environment for, so that they can succeed. And look at others that may have or other partnerships that allow us to direct students that are experiencing similar things to other entities, to other resources that are a part of it.
Thank you so much. Trustee Bettis, do you have any more questions?
No, I mean, I honestly, Matt, I don't think you answered any way differently than what I feel on it. And I think as I'm looking at going from 0 to 60 in terms of need, it's probably a question ultimately of what level of risk the district is willing to engage in to sort of make it happen. But it appears to be that the need is spread pretty universally. You can find, I mean, maybe the student need, I think I saw between 11 and 22%. So, I mean, if we wanted to take an extrapolation from the student data, I mean, I think we'd want to circle the higher levels of the respondents, but there's 11% of a 20,000 person campus is still a pretty significant amount of people. So yeah, no, thank you, Trustee.
Yeah, and thank you for bringing those points up. I appreciate that. Next up is Trustee Buena. Did you have your hand?
I want to say thank you for the presentation, my colleagues for the questions, and I think you've been very clear, and I appreciate that. And the methodology and just the way it was presented, it was very nice, and I want to thank you for that. That was it.
Okay, thank you, President Buena. Any other questions from our trustees? Okay, I see Trustee Eno say no. Okay, all right. Well, if there is no other opposition to adjourning, I think we can go ahead and adjourn. Is there anything else I'm missing? No? All right. I guess meeting adjourned. Thank you, everybody. And thank you so much to all the presenters. Appreciate it. We'll see all of us back again here at 1 p.m. for the regular board meeting.
And some of us for the tenure reception.
Thank you. So ordered.